You have an organism living in your kitchen whose genetic code is longer than yours. 3.5 billion base pairs, more than a human, more than a dolphin, more than most mammals we consider complex and advanced. And all of this is packed into a creature that fits entirely in the palm of your hand. We're talking about a cockroach. Yes, the very one you tried to squash with your slipper last night. Today, we'll discuss why this reflex of disgust prevents you from seeing one of the most sophisticated biological machines on the planet. Let's start with blood. More precisely, the fact that cockroaches don't have blood at all. Instead, a fluid called hemolymph circulates through their bodies, performing the functions of blood, lymph, and even part of the immune system. It's not red because it lacks hemoglobin. It doesn't need to carry oxygen. Cockroaches have a separate, much more elegant system for that, which we'll discuss in a moment. Hemolymph simply bathes all internal organs directly, without vessels, without capillaries, without all the complex plumbing that constantly clogs up our systems and leads to heart attacks. Before we continue, please write in the comments where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. Now, about the heart. Cockroaches have one, but it operates on a principle that our cardiologists would find impossible. It's a tube pump without valves. It rhythmically contracts, pushing hemolymph through the body. And here's what's truly interesting. This heart can be stopped, completely, and then restarted, allowing the cockroach to continue living as if nothing happened. Try doing that with a human heart, and you'll cause irreversible brain damage in 4 minutes. The cockroach, on the other hand, will simply get up and keep running, because its body is designed with a completely different margin of safety. Now, let's talk about that elegant respiratory system I promised. A cockroach doesn't breathe through its mouth, nose, or lungs. Along its body is a network of microscopic tubes, tracheae, that deliver oxygen directly to each cell. No intermediaries, no blood as transport. Air simply enters through tiny openings on the sides of the body and travels through the branch system of tubes to every point in the organism. Given its small size, this system is more efficient than lungs, significantly more efficient, because it removes an entire link from the chain. It doesn't need hemoglobin, it doesn't need red blood cells, it doesn't need all that gas transport logistics. Oxygen travels from the point of entry to the point of consumption via the shortest route. Engineers call this direct delivery. Nature figured it out 300 million years before any engineer. You've probably seen a white cockroach at least once and thought it was some rare species, or that the cockroach was sick. In reality, what you saw was a regular cockroach in the most vulnerable moment of its life. Cockroaches don't grow like we do. Their hard outer skeleton, exoskeleton, doesn't stretch. So to grow larger, a cockroach must literally crawl out of its own shell and grow a new one. This process is called molting. For several hours after molting, the new shell is still soft and hasn't gained pigment. During this time, the cockroach is white, soft, and completely defenseless. This isn't an anomaly or a disease. It's a window of vulnerability that every cockroach on the planet passes through several times in its life, and each time it survives. Considering the number of predators around, this alone speaks volumes about the quality of its other defense mechanisms. Now let's talk about an organ you don't have and never will. Inside a cockroach, there's a structure called the fat body, and despite its dull name, it's one of the most multifunctional organs in nature. The fat body serves as the liver, an energy store, and part of the immune system all at once. It accumulates nutrients, detoxifies toxins, and produces cells that fight infections. Invertebrates, like you, me, and any mammal, each of these tasks has a separate organ. The liver handles detoxification. Adipose tissue stores energy. Immune organs produce protective cells. The cockroach has combined all of this into one structure, and it works. In fact, it works so reliably that this design hasn't changed in hundreds of millions of years because evolution simply had no reason to improve it. Now, about the brain. More precisely, the brains, plural. A cockroach doesn't have a single control center for its body. Instead, clusters of nerve cells, ganglia, are scattered throughout its body. Each one controls its own section. The thoracic ganglion manages the legs. The abdominal ganglia control digestion and respiration. The head ganglion processes information from the antennae and eyes. And they all work semi-autonomously. This means a cockroach can stand, move, respond to touch, and even learn simple reflexes without its head. For days, it will die not from loss of control, but from dehydration because it can't drink. When you first hear about this, it seems like a primitive design, like they didn't even grow a proper brain. But think about this. Damage to one area of your brain can paralyze half your body. For a cockroach, losing one control node means losing control only over the segment that node serviced. The rest of the body continues to function. This isn't primitiveness. It's a distributed architecture of fault tolerance. The same principle is used today in designing server networks and spacecraft. Nature, as usual, solved this problem first. And lastly in this section, what turns the cockroach from just a tough insect into something bordering on science fiction? Cockroaches can regrow lost limbs. Not completely at once, but gradually, from molt to molt, the lost leg regenerates. With each new molt, the regenerated limb becomes slightly longer and more functional until it reaches normal size. Such ability is extremely rare among insects. For most, a lost limb is permanent. The cockroach literally rebuilds itself step by step, using the very molting process that makes it vulnerable as a recovery tool. In summary, we have an organism with a genetic code more complex than ours, with a respiratory system more efficient than our lungs, with a heart that can be stopped and restarted, with a distributed nervous system that we're still trying to replicate in technology, and with a regenerative ability that humanity can only dream of. And all of this elicits only one reaction from most people: squash it quickly. In the second part, we'll discuss what's happening in this creature's head. More precisely, in its heads. Because cockroaches can learn, communicate through chemical signals, and make collective decisions that are mathematically optimal, and that deserves special attention. In 1912, American zoologist Charles Turner conducted an experiment that almost no one remembers today. He took cockroaches and began teaching them to navigate a maze. Not rats, not pigeons, not monkeys, cockroaches. And they succeeded. They remembered the route, made fewer mistakes with each attempt, and demonstrated a classic learning curve. This was decades before B.F. Skinner began working with rats in his famous boxes and became the face of behaviorism. The cockroach was one of the first laboratory learners in the history of behavioral science. But this isn't mentioned in textbooks because the subject was too unpleasant for the cover. More than 100 years have passed since then, and we've learned something even stranger about cockroach intelligence. A group of researchers from Tohoku University in Japan discovered that a cockroach's ability to learn depends on the time of day. This sounds like a minor detail, but it was actually groundbreaking. Cockroaches trained in the evening, at the start of their active period, learn the task faster and retain the skill longer than those trained in the morning. A cockroach's brain literally works differently depending on the position of its internal biological clock. And when scientists described this, it became clear that the connection between circadian rhythms and memory formation isn't just a feature of mammals or a human specificity. It's a fundamental mechanism that works even in insects. The cockroach helped us understand how the time of day affects memory in all animals on the planet, including you. When you can't learn anything late at night, that's the same mechanism that the Japanese first described in detail in cockroaches. But learning is just the beginning. Because cockroaches don't just learn, they communicate, and they do it in a language you can neither hear nor see. Cockroaches talk through chemistry. Their bodies constantly release pheromones, volatile molecules, each carrying a specific message. One molecule signals danger. Another indicates that there's good shelter nearby, warm, dark, with the right humidity. A third contains information about reproductive status, whether a female is ready to mate, how healthy a male is. A fourth acts like a passport, indicating whether the encountered cockroach belongs to your colony or is a stranger. This isn't a single signal for all occasions. It's a full-fledged multi-channel communication system where each substance encodes a specific type of information. And the cockroach reads all of this simultaneously, with its antennae, on the go, without stopping. You walk past a cockroach and see a dull insect. Meanwhile, the cockroach processes as much chemical data about its environment as you wouldn't gather from the air, even with laboratory equipment. Now, let's discuss why it's so hard to poison a cockroach. And it's not just about physiology, it's about behavior. Cockroaches have a trait called neophobia. This is a deeply ingrained wariness towards any new object in their environment. New food, new objects, new smells. All of these trigger avoidance, not curiosity. A cockroach won't approach an unfamiliar bait right away. It will circle it for hours, sometimes days. It will wait for someone else to try it first. Only if that other one survives and there are no signs of danger will it maybe try it itself. From a survival perspective in an environment where people constantly set out poisonous traps, this strategy works brilliantly. Curiosity kills. Caution preserves the species. And cockroaches chose caution long before humans invented the first insecticide. Now we come to what impressed me the most while preparing this material. In 2006, Belgian researcher José Hallot from the Free University of Brussels conducted an experiment that looked simple. He gave a group of cockroaches a choice between several shelters and began observing. The cockroaches didn't scatter randomly. They didn't split evenly among all available options. Instead, they collectively chose the optimal number of shelters and distributed themselves so that each had enough individuals to maintain the necessary humidity and temperature, but not so many as to create overcrowding and competition for resources. And here's the key point. No single cockroach managed the process. There was no leader, no scout, no coordinator. Each individual followed a simple set of local rules. Stay if a certain number of peers are nearby. Leave if there are too many or too few. These simple individual rules, applied simultaneously by all group members, led to a result that was mathematically optimal for the entire colony. This principle, a global optimum from local rules without centralized control, today underpins an entire field in computer science and robotics. Algorithms for controlling swarms of drones work exactly this way. Each device follows simple rules regarding its nearest neighbors, and the swarm as a whole moves in an organized manner without a dispatcher. Engineers arrived at this solution in the 21st century. Cockroaches have been using it for hundreds of millions of years. And when Hallett published his results, engineers began studying his work not from a zoological perspective, but out of pure practical interest, because the cockroach had already solved a problem they were trying to tackle from scratch. And to conclude this section, a fact that shatters the perception of cockroaches as predictable survival machines. Female American cockroaches are capable of parthenogenesis, reproduction without male involvement. If there are no males around, a female doesn't stop reproducing. She produces offspring on her own, and all the resulting nymphs turn out to be females, each of whom is also capable of parthenogenesis. If you calculate this in terms of population growth, the result is staggering. With normal reproduction, half the offspring are males, who don't produce eggs themselves. With parthenogenesis, all offspring are future mothers. The population growth rate doubles. Cockroaches use this mechanism not constantly, but specifically in crisis conditions. When the population is small, when males are absent for some reason, when the colony is on the brink. This is a biological emergency mode that activates exactly when it's needed and turns off when the situation stabilizes. To summarize, cockroaches are capable of learning, and this was proven more than a century ago. Their memory depends on circadian rhythms, and this fact helps scientists understand fundamental mechanisms of memory. They communicate in a chemical language, the complexity of which we've only begun to understand with the development of analytical chemistry. They avoid traps not because they're smart in the usual sense, but because evolution has ingrained caution towards the new into their behavior, and this strategy has proven successful over millions of generations. They solve collective optimization problems that were just beginning to formulate for computers, and they switch between normal and emergency reproductive modes depending on circumstances, like a system with a plan for disaster. All of this makes a creature the size of a coin, which we consider a mindless pest. In the third part, we'll talk about time, real geological time, because cockroaches have survived 5 mass extinctions, each of which wiped out those who seemed stronger, larger, and more complex. And they remained. The reasons for this deserve detailed examination. 320 million years ago, there were no dinosaurs on Earth. No mammals, no birds, no flowers, no grass. The continents hadn't yet split. Land was one giant mass. And the air was different. It contained about 35% oxygen, almost twice today's 21%. And it was in this oxygen-saturated world that the first cockroach-like creatures appeared. Not exactly like modern ones, but already recognizable by body structure, wing shape, and overall design. They lived among fern forests, in a litter of decaying plants, and they were large, significantly larger than those that run across your kitchen. And here's why. The tracheal system, the very network of respiratory tubes we discussed in the first part, directly depends on the concentration of oxygen in the air. The more oxygen, the longer the tubes can be, and the larger the body they can supply. At 35% oxygen, insects grew to sizes that today seem impossible. Dragonflies with wingspans of 70 centimeters, millipedes longer than 2 meters, and cockroaches that were several times larger than their current descendants. Then oxygen levels began to drop. Slowly, over tens of millions of years, the atmosphere changed, and the giant insects disappeared one by one because their bodies could no longer get enough air through the tracheal system. The cockroach did what turned out to be the only sensible move. It shrank. It adjusted its size to the new conditions while preserving everything else: the body structure, type of respiration, feeding method, and molting system. And it survived. When you look at a cockroach and think it's small and insignificant, you're actually looking at an organism that was once large and consciously, well, evolutionarily, sacrificed size to continue existing. But the drop in oxygen levels was a minor detail compared to what happened 252 million years ago. The Permian extinction, the most massive catastrophe in the history of life on this planet. 96% of marine species ceased to exist. On land, the percentage was slightly lower, but not by much. Oceans became toxic, temperatures soared, and oxygen became critically low. Those that survived previous crises due to strength, speed, or complexity turned out to be too dependent on stable conditions. Meanwhile, the cockroach was omnivorous. It ate plants, it ate fungi, it ate dead animals, it ate decaying wood, it ate the droppings of other creatures. And here's the key point. After any catastrophe, after eruptions, after impacts from space, after the extinction of 9 out of 10 species, one thing always remains in abundance: dead organic matter, corpses, rotting trunks, layers of decay. For most organisms, this is the end of the ecosystem. For the cockroach, it's a buffet. Its omnivorousness, which is merely beneficial in normal times, becomes an absolute advantage in crises. While specialized species went extinct due to the disappearance of specific food sources, the cockroach switched to whatever was available. And what's always available after a global catastrophe is the same thing, products of destruction. And the cockroach has survived not just the Permian extinction, it has survived all 5 mass extinctions recorded in paleontology. Each of these reshaped the face of life on the planet. Each removed dominant species and made room for new ones. Dinosaurs appeared and went extinct. Mammoths appeared and went extinct. Saber-toothed cats, giant sloths, marine reptiles, all came and went. The cockroach remained, not because it's the strongest and not because it's the fastest, but because its survival strategy turned out to be universal: be small, eat everything, reproduce quickly, and not depend on conditions that could change tomorrow. Now, a fact that turned the entire classification system of insects upside down in the early 2000s. Termites are cockroaches, not relatives of cockroaches, not neighbors on the evolutionary tree. They are cockroaches. Molecular analysis showed that termites descended from an ancestor resembling the modern Cryptocercus, a wood cockroach living in family groups in decaying logs. At some point in evolution, one branch of these wood cockroaches developed a complex social organization with castes, division of labor, construction of giant structures, and collective cultivation of fungi. And this branch became what we know as termites. Before this discovery, termites were considered a separate order of insects. After it, they were included in the order Blatoda. This wasn't just a renaming for the sake of order, it was a re-evaluation of the entire evolutionary history of one of the most successful groups of insects on Earth. And the re-evaluation began with a simple question: what if a termite is just a very social cockroach that has advanced further in development than the others? Now let's talk about how cockroaches ended up in your home, not specifically yours, but in the context of civilization. Most of the over 4,000 species of cockroaches live in forests, caves, deserts, and soil, and never approach human dwellings. No more than 30 species live near us, and their journey into our homes is a story of unintentional globalization. The German cockroach, despite its name, likely originated from Southeast Asia. The American cockroach is actually of African descent. They spread around the world alongside trade routes, hiding in ship holds, traveling with armies and caravans. The era of the slave trade and colonial commerce from the 16th to the 18th century became a time of global expansion for these species. Not because they sought to conquer new territories, they have no such strategy, but because humans continuously moved vast amounts of cargo, food, wood, and fabric across oceans, and in each such shipment, there could be a dozen cockroaches with egg cases. That's all it takes. Their omnivorousness, rapid reproduction, and ability to live near any source of heat and food did the rest. The cockroach didn't colonize the world, we did, and accidentally took the cockroach along with us. And finally, in this section, a story that's happening right now before our eyes. In 2013, researcher Kobe Wada and his team documented a mutation that changed the taste perception of glucose in the German cockroach. Normally, glucose signals sweetness, and sweetness for any animal means calories, energy, food. But for decades, humans have used glucose as the basis for baits in insecticide traps, and a portion of the cockroach population experienced a mutation. Receptors that previously recognized glucose as sweet began to perceive it as bitter. Bitter means poison, means danger, means don't eat. Cockroaches with this mutation stopped approaching traps. They survived, produced offspring, and the mutation spread through the population. In just a few decades, a negligible time in evolutionary terms, a significant portion of urban cockroaches became resistant to the type of bait that had worked since the mid-20th century. This is observable evolution, not reconstructed from fossils, not calculated from genetic data in hindsight, but documented in real time with a described mechanism and tracked spread. Such cases in biology can be counted on one hand, and each is valuable because it turns evolution from a theoretical model into an observable process. The cockroach gave us this opportunity, the chance to see how natural selection works not in a textbook, but in the neighboring building. In the fourth part, we'll discuss how cockroaches are useful right now, about substances that could replace antibiotics, about space experiments, and about how diverse the world of cockroaches is beyond your kitchen. The last new class of antibiotics was discovered in the 1980s. More than 40 years have passed since then, and nothing fundamentally new has appeared. Not because scientists aren't working hard, but because bacteria have proven to be faster. They mutate, exchange resistance genes, and form strains that no existing drugs can combat. The World Health Organization has included antibiotic-resistant bacteria on its list of major threats to humanity. And this isn't an overreaction, it's arithmetic. If the trend continues, in a couple of decades, a routine appendectomy will again become a risky procedure because there will be no way to treat post-operative infections. Against this backdrop, in 2010, British researcher Simone Lee from the University of Nottingham discovered 9 previously unknown antimicrobial peptides in the nervous tissue of cockroaches. Peptides are short protein chains, and those found by Lee did something very important. They killed bacteria resistant to ordinary antibiotics, including Staphylococcus aureus and Escherichia coli, 2 microorganisms that are among the most dangerous hospital infections in the world. And here's the crucial point. The mechanism of action of these peptides differs from everything we currently use. Ordinary antibiotics work delicately. They block a specific metabolic process inside the bacteria. They build a specific protein. The antibiotic breaks it. They copy DNA. The antibiotic stops it. But bacteria can mutate to bypass a specific block, and then the antibiotic ceases to work. The peptides from the cockroach work more roughly and effectively. They destroy the bacterial cell membrane, physically. They punch holes in the wall, and the cell dies. For bacteria to develop resistance to such an impact, they would have to reconstruct their entire outer shell, and that's orders of magnitude more complex than changing a single enzyme. The cockroach carries in its nervous system a weapon against bacteria that we can't defeat with the best technologies of the 21st century. And it has carried it for hundreds of millions of years because it lives in an environment teeming with pathogens, in decaying organic matter, in sewage, in compost. It needed protection, and evolution provided it. We just need to find and replicate it. And this isn't the only example. In China, a cockroach-based drug, kengfuxin, has been used for centuries. For a long time, Western medicine regarded this as folklore. But in 2018, results from clinical trials were published, showing a specific and reproducible mechanism of action. The substances in the drug stimulate the growth of epithelial cells, those that line the surface of the skin, intestines, and internal organs. In simpler terms, they accelerate healing, not at the level of subjective feelings, but at the level of measurable cellular growth. And this raises an uncomfortable question for science. How many more traditional insect-based remedies that we've considered superstitions for decades contain real, working pharmacology that we simply haven't bothered to verify? Now, from the hospital to space. In 2007, a female cockroach named Nadezhda was sent into space aboard the Russian biosatellite Photon M. Not out of sentimentality, it was a serious experiment to study the effects of microgravity on the development of the nervous system. Nadezhda became pregnant and gave birth in space, and her nymphs became the first earthly creatures whose nervous systems began to form in zero gravity. The results were unexpected. The nervous systems of the space nymphs developed faster than those of the control group on Earth. Faster, not slower. This contradicted expectations because most scientists assumed that the absence of gravity would slow down or disrupt the formation of motor programs, the very schemes that control movement and coordination. Instead, it turned out that the nervous system, free from gravitational load, spends the freed resources on accelerated development. This result is still being discussed because it calls into question the usual understanding of the role of gravity in brain and body formation. And the opportunity to obtain this result was provided by the cockroach, because its short life cycle, hardiness, and ability to reproduce in closed systems make it one of the best model organisms for space biology. Now let's talk about the world of cockroaches that exists beyond your kitchen, which has nothing to do with the reddish runner you know. More than 4,500 species of cockroaches have been described on the planet, and the vast majority of them will never approach human dwellings. Let's start with the extremes. In Australia, there's a giant burrowing cockroach, a creature weighing 35 grams, the size of an adult human hand. It doesn't fly, doesn't run up walls, and doesn't crawl into food. It lives in burrows it digs up to a meter deep in dry Australian soil. It feeds exclusively on fallen eucalyptus leaves, lives up to 10 years, and cares for its offspring, which is quite rare among cockroaches. This quiet, slow, completely harmless creature is kept by some people in Australia as a pet. On the other end of the scale is the Atalapha, a cockroach measuring 3 millimeters. It lives inside the fungal gardens cultivated by leafcutter ants. Leafcutter ants are known for their aggressiveness towards intruders. They kill anyone trying to enter their colony. But the Atalapha has somehow learned to produce substances on its surface that mimic the chemical profile of the ants themselves. It smells like an ant. It's covered in the same molecules that ants use to recognize their own. And that's why the ants leave it alone. It lives among them, eats their fungi, moves through their tunnels, and remains invisible to their chemical recognition system. This level of chemical camouflage is something that even the intelligence agencies of world powers can only envy. And in the caves of Malaysia lives a cockroach that has almost no eyes. Generation after generation, it has lived in complete darkness, rendering vision useless. Instead, long, ultra-sensitive antennae have developed, capable of detecting the slightest movement of air and the tiniest chemical signals. This cockroach navigates through space entirely through touch and smell. And here's what's remarkable: the exact same adaptations, reduction of eyes, elongation of antennae, enhancement of chemical perception, have independently developed in cave-dwelling crabs, cave fish, and cave spiders in completely different parts of the world. This is called convergent evolution, when identical conditions produce the same solutions in unrelated organisms. The cave cockroach is a living illustration that evolution is neither random nor chaotic. It has logic, and this logic repeats wherever the task is the same. And here we are at the end. Let's return to what we started with in the very first episode. In your palm rests a creature with a genetic code longer than yours. It breathes more efficiently than you do. Its heart can be stopped and restarted. Its nervous system is built on a principle we're copying for managing swarms of drones. It communicates in a chemical language that we've only just begun to decode. It has survived 5 mass extinctions, each of which wiped out species that seemed invincible. It produces substances in its body capable of combating infections that modern medicine cannot defeat. It has been to space and helped us understand how microgravity affects brain development. And it lives next to you not because it wandered in by chance, but because it knows how to survive better than any other multicellular organism on this planet. 320 million years of continuous practice. The results are clear. Maybe instead of reaching for that slipper, it's worth taking a moment to stop and acknowledge. Before you is one of the greatest achievements of evolution, and it deserves not disgust, but at least respect.